Good evening. If you want to turn your Bible, we'll be in Mark chapter 9 tonight. Maybe one of the most challenging Sunday nights of this entire thing for me, because if you have been following along with the Bible reading plan, it's almost the entire book of Mark this past week. And so it's like throwing a dart at the stories of the life of Jesus to figure out which one do you pick when it's just one out of all of that group. And so I thought we would talk about, in Mark chapter 9, it's an interesting chapter because it has highs and lows. And I feel like life is kind of like that a lot of the time. We sometimes will have these really high mountaintop moments where it seems like just everything is right, and spiritually speaking, we feel just an incredible connection to God and the things we're trying to do and the things He's trying to do through us. And then when you're in those moments, it seems like oftentimes that's when you tend to get attacked by the plans of Satan or by people who are against you or whatever it may be, and you find yourself going from this incredibly high moment suddenly to, it's so deep in the pits now. I was thinking of, Richard mentioned this morning how nice it is to be up front in the morning sometimes and see all the faces and hear the singing and all of those things. I got to lead singing at Harding in chapel 2 or 3 times, I think, during the time we lived there. Once when I was a student, once later on as a minister, I got invited to come over and do it. And the second time I remember doing it, at least, it was me and another Bible professor who was there, and we were each kind of taking turns leading different songs, and we had 2 podiums and 2 microphones set up there, and we were going through these songs, and I didn't pick any of them. He gave me a list. He's in chapel every day. I was a minister in town, so I wasn't. And so he gave me this list of songs that they were going to sing. I have no idea what they've sung the rest of the week. I don't know if this is kind of how chapel is usually and whatever it is, but he gave me the list. I didn't know 2 of the songs. I tried to learn them. And as I'm up there, one of the neatest things about getting to lead singing at chapel at Harding is there are about 3,500 students in the auditorium. And I think I've mentioned before, the first time I led, I intentionally led the greatest commands, which is that one of those songs where you have sopranos and then different parts. I think it starts with altos, and you add all these different parts. But as the guy, I was able to start the song and listen to a verse or 2. And I did it on purpose because I wanted to listen to a verse or 2 to hear what the 3,500 people sounded like, and it was unreal. So this day I get up and I'm leading the songs that I haven't chosen, and I get done, and it was like the highlight of the month to have gotten to be there and be a part of that and to hear the singing. And as I got down off the stage, there were several students that came up to both me and the other song leader, and they were just thanking us, and they thought it was the best chapel of the week, and they were so excited. And then a guy comes up to me and he says, "Why didn't you sing any old songs?" To which I'm thinking, I don't know the answer to this question because I didn't pick any of the songs. But I'm trying to take one for the team and not throw the other song leader under the bus. And I said, well, my understanding was there were a lot of older songs this week, and this was kind of the contrast to that. But I don't know. I got it. And I will tell you that as great as that chapel was, and as great as the first 5 or 6 comments were, years later, that's the one I remember. I don't remember the other faces. I don't remember specifically what they said. I didn't use this person's name on purpose, even though I remember it completely, because that is the one that stuck out in my head. And I look at Jesus in Mark chapter 9, and he experiences one of the highest moments of his life on earth, and then walks down the mountain into what looks like chaos. He's on the top of the mountain, and he is transfigured, which is one of those words that if you're anything like me, you never encountered until you got to Scripture. It's not something we talk about in other places. And so you had to go figure out, well, what does that mean? And basically, the idea is that somehow, I don't understand exactly how it works, but somehow his face was bright like light. And he just shone up there on the side of the mountain. And then somewhere along the way, Moses and Elijah appear alongside. And one of those many questions I have for when I get to heaven is, how did they know? It's not like Peter and John have ever seen Moses and Elijah before. How did they know that that's who it was? But they knew, however they did. Peter has this great idea of, we should build tents here to have a place to honor this moment and all of that. And then this voice comes from heaven and says, "This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased. listen to him. If you ever wanted the seal of approval on the message of Jesus, it literally comes in what I assume to be a booming voice from the sky. And all of that happens, and then they go back down the mountain. And I don't know, maybe part of what Peter had in mind is if we build these tents, do we ever have to leave here? I mean, this was pretty great. Could we just stay here? And maybe you feel that way sometimes when it's one of those incredible spiritual kind of moments of, I don't want this to stop quite yet. But oftentimes we don't realize when everything is going to come crashing back down to earth. And for Jesus and Peter and John, it happens pretty quickly. In Mark chapter 9, maybe. There we go. In Mark chapter 9, I went backwards on purpose. There we go. Mark chapter 9, starting verse 14, it says, when they came to the disciples, so they're coming back down the mountain to the rest of the group, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. So they go from this high moment to chaos. There is a very large argument going on. And maybe you've had those kind of things happen too, where everything is peaceful and good and nice, and then you open a door and it's a mess. And you feel like everything should be a certain way, and it's just not that way, or you feel like everything should be good in life, and tragedy hits, or whatever it may be. They walk into this moment of chaos. It's all been good and exciting, and voices from heaven, and people shining light, and now here's this argument that's going on. And it says that immediately the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And this word that's used for amazed, it might mean excited, depending on the context you find it in. And there are, if you were to start reading through Bible commentaries, there are a lot of different opinions on why. There are commentators that are convinced that there is a residual glow of some kind. I don't know exactly how that works either, but Jesus has been shining like the sun up on the mountain, and that didn't wear off completely, and so they see a guy with a very shiny face coming back down. I don't think it's that personally, because Jesus has told them not to talk to anyone about what happened, and if he's still shining like the sun, they're going to have to talk to somebody about what happened. I think they're excited because they are also experiencing this chaos down there, and they don't want to be a part of that either. They want to see Jesus and see what Jesus will do. And if you have ever been in the middle of chaos and someone shows up that you think is going to fix it, that is a welcome face to see. When I was a student at Harding, we went and did tornado relief in this little town where there'd been all this devastation from a tornado, and the guy in charge had no idea what he was doing. He had never done anything like that before, and it showed. And I can't be too critical, because I would have been the same way at that point in life. I would have had no idea what to do either. And I looked around and saw all these college students getting kind of frustrated because they really wanted to do something, but they needed somebody to tell them what to do. And you had a few self-starters that were out there just trying to pick things up and do something. And then one of the buses that carried us down there, the door opened up, and I saw getting off of that bus the guy who had been a former student body president who had led a relief trip like that before. And it was the same kind of deal where he looked around and he just saw chaos, but people knew when they saw him get off the bus it was going to be okay. And suddenly, he first of all goes to the guy who's supposed to be in charge and says, "Could you use some help?" And the guy who's supposed to be in charge says, "Yes, I could use some help." And then he begins to direct people and tell them where to go and what to do within moments of getting off the bus, and now it's all beginning to work again. So they're amazed because it's Jesus, and they've heard him, and he has this reputation that goes before him, and I think there's probably also some excitement of maybe now the argument can stop and something can happen, because clearly there's disagreement of some kind going on in the midst of this chaos. So he asked them, verse 16, "What are you arguing about with them?" And when we see Jesus ask questions, I always enjoy it because I know he already knows the answer. But he asked this question for them to kind of refocus, and probably to our modern day version of this would be whoever the guy is with the really shrill whistle that would walk in the middle of the crowd and just do the whistle, and everybody would stop for a minute. Jesus asked this question of, what's the argument all about? What is it that you're arguing about here? Or maybe, what's going on? You know, I leave you guys for a minute. We go up on the mountainside. Really cool things are happening up there. We'll tell you about one of these days. And then I come back down here, and everybody's arguing, and it's chaotic. What is the deal? And so rather than one of the disciples answer, who I assume is who he's really talking to, it says that someone from the crowd answered him. And this voice from the crowd says, "Teacher, I brought my son to you." Wasn't even looking for these guys, but you weren't here, so I was trying to get to you, and they offered to help. "I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." Probably one of the most complete answers Jesus has ever received to a question he asks. It's more than just, "We're arguing because they can't heal my son." It's, "Let me tell you about what this has been like." And if you're a parent or a family member of someone who has had some sort of a physical ailment of some kind, you get what this is like. And you know the experience and the trauma that comes with it and the difficulty that comes with it. So this dad just lays out the whole story of what it's been like. Because this is, for him, this is my son. And I can tell this story better than anyone else can. And I can explain to you what's going on, and you can feel from what I'm saying just the struggle that I'm having and the turmoil that our lives have been because of this. And I came to you out of desperation. You weren't here, but your disciples here, they assured me they could help, and they've not been able to. And I also imagine in the midst of all this, the disciples maybe being a little bit defensive about it and thinking, "Well, we tried. We did the things we've done before, but for whatever reason it didn't work." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." Probably not what they were looking to hear when Jesus came down off the side of the mountain. Faithless generation. And because we are just picking one thing out of the book of Mark with our readings, it's worthwhile for us to realize that this idea of labeling a generation for Jesus is something that's happened a few times within these chapters. Back in chapter 8, and in verse 12, it says that he sighed deeply. He's talking to a bunch of Pharisees at this point. He sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation." So they want a sign to prove what it is that Jesus is teaching and doing. And he says, "I'm not going to give you a sign." And he calls them this generation that is just in need of a sign. This is the thing they've got to have to make all of this work. And then later in the same chapter, in verse 38, he says, "Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." So within these two chapters, they are a faithless generation, they are a generation who is seeking a sign, and they are a generation who is sinful. Sinful and adulterous is the way he says it. And I think the common thread with all of these is they're all related to faith. Being faithless, clearly, I don't have to explain that one too much. But in search of a sign is, "I will believe if." We see it from Thomas after Jesus has come back and resurrected from the dead, that Thomas says, "I'm not going to believe unless I can see his hands and put my hand in his side," and all of those things. He wants a sign. The people along the way throughout Scripture, for him to prove himself, they want to see a sign of some kind. It's faith. And these people who are sinful, it's because, as we talked about this morning, their faith was not active in the way that says, "I'm going to be different because of what I believe." They believed, or at least they thought they did, but it wasn't changing who they were. And so all these struggles with faith are coming to this generation, and I think to ours too. We have so many struggles with wanting to believe, but struggling with that belief, which is the same thing we'll see from the Father in this story. Verse 20, back in chapter 9. I'm sorry, that's Matthew chapter 9, not Mark chapter 9. Let me read it for you. Mark chapter 9, and verse 20, if I can find my spot. It says, "And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth." So when this demon that he has sees him, he immediately falls down and begins convulsing. And if you were here this morning, I want you to hear echoing in this verse what we read about this morning in the book of James. You believe that God is one and you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. The demons didn't need to see what happened on the top of the mountain. They already knew who he was. They didn't need to hear the voice from the sky. They didn't need to see his face light up like the sun. They know that this is Jesus. and it makes them afraid. And so they put this boy down, and he is convulsing on the ground. Verse 21 says, Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? We talked a little bit this morning about the importance of listening and listening patiently. How valuable is it for this dad, who probably has felt very pushed to the side in society a lot of times, to have someone really want to know, really want to hear about what it is he's been dealing with? How long has this been happening to him? And he said from childhood. Do you imagine, and some of you don't have to imagine, you've experienced difficulties throughout the life of your kids or your grandkids, but everything within this father who just wants to make it better, just wants his son to be okay. From childhood, this has happened. And it has often cast him into fire and water. All you want to do as a dad is protect sometimes, and he can't. There's nothing he can do to stop this from happening, to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Just desperation. If you can do anything to make this better, have compassion. And this father recognizes something that I think for a lot of us and a lot of people within our world, it takes far too long to get to, which is we need help from Jesus. And there are all these other places that people will seek and try to find something that will make their lives different, but those things are not going to be good enough, and those people are not going to be good enough. He needs help from Jesus. And he begins by acknowledging the fact there is a need for help. And I think we see something in this father that we probably see within our own world, our own lives sometimes. When there is something that you cannot fix and you cannot control, aren't those usually the times where you get desperate enough that maybe you're finally willing to ask for help? I was thinking the other day as I was watching Caleb go very fast on his zero turn around the yard, and mine still will not start, by the way. The Caleb has offered multiple times to let me borrow his zero turn, and I never do it because I'm a guy and you don't do that. And I go get my push mower and start pushing and mowing, and Caleb has got to look at me and shake his head and just think, what's wrong with that guy? I don't want to admit I need help a lot of the time. I'd rather do it myself, even if it takes so much effort that it wears you down. This dad is at a place where there is no other option. And I don't wish that on any of us, to be at a place where we feel like we're at just the end of our rope. But I will tell you that when you're there, the fact that you need help from Jesus is pretty clear. I hope we could figure that out without having to get to that point, to realize that in the midst of just regular life, we need help from Jesus. And this guy sees it. And he sees the fact even that these apostles who've done a lot of amazing things already at this point, they've been sent out to heal people. That's why they thought they could handle it. And that's why the father thought, well, I can't get to Jesus, but these guys, they do a pretty good job, and maybe he needs help from Jesus. It's going to take something more. Verse 23, it says, Jesus said to him, if you can. And maybe sometimes Jesus is saying that to us. If I can, what do you mean? You know what I can do. If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes. So secondly, as we think about seeking help from Jesus, we need to recognize that all things are possible for him. And if you have thought to yourself, well, this can't change, or that person can't change, or I can't do this differently, or I can never be like that, or let go of this sin problem, or whatever, all things are possible. And for most of you, I would imagine as you look back over your life, you can probably see some things that you never could imagine having happened or having done, and yet through the power of Jesus and through the power of the Spirit and what God does in your life, those things happen. All things are possible. And so this man hears the message that he desperately wants to hear, but as is true for a lot of us, that still doesn't get you all the way there sometimes. Because you really want to believe it, but maybe like the people in chapter 8, you also maybe want to see a sign. You want something that's going to just affirm this a little more for you. It says that immediately the father of the child cried out and said, one of my very favorite phrases that anybody ever says to Jesus. I believe, help my unbelief. If we are getting help from Jesus, we need to recognize that whatever level of faith we are at right now can increase. So if you look at yourself and you look around at other people and you think, how do they rely on their faith so well and I struggle so much? How does their belief carry them through these difficult things? And man, I wish I could be like that. I believe the message of Jesus in this chapter is you can. You can be more faithful than you are today. Your faith can impact everything about your life and make you someone who stands in difficult times, or someone who, as we were talking about on Wednesday nights right now, someone that maybe worry moves back a little bit. And that's not immediate, and it's not always consistent, but it's something that we can be and can do. We can be people who worry less because of the faith that we have in God increasing. So when Jesus saw, verse 25, when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." And I imagine there is this moment as they're all looking at this boy lying on the ground. They think, well, this is not really how we thought this was going to turn out today. They're just sure it's done and over. And it says, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Sometimes as we seek help from Jesus, we have to remember that death comes before life. We have to die to the things that have been holding us back from him, that have kept us something between us and him, the things that we get so focused on that we think we can't really get to him. We have to die to those things that are in the way and live to something that is better. And again, Jesus is the one who gives us the power to be able to do that. It's not stuff that we can always do on our own. Willpower is only going to take you so far. And you have experienced that in everything else in life probably at this point. You have, if you're anything like me, you have lost weight and gained weight again, and lost weight and gained weight again, and lost weight and gained weight again. You have started a Bible reading plan and dropped it somewhere along the way. You have done something that you thought, I can just power my way through this, and eventually that wears off. Jesus can take you far beyond where willpower can. Death to whatever it is that we are experiencing that we need to let go of comes before the life that he can give us. And in a very dramatic way in the story of Mark 9, but for each of us, there are probably things we need to let loose of, things that are idols in our lives, things that are getting in the way of Jesus. Death to that comes before life. And then when he entered the house, and I appreciate this just little detail in this story, that, and as I've read, I've learned that a lot of times rabbis would make a point of doing something that they knew their disciples did not understand, and then waiting till they were alone together to explain what it was. And so they're alone in the house, away from the crowd that already, by the way, has had it proven to them the weakness of the disciples and the strength of the rabbi. As they're there, they ask him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" Which is a pretty reasonable question, honestly. They have previously in the Gospels been sent out to do miraculous things and been able to do them. And then he answers in a very interesting way. He said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." We, if we are going to be people who seek help from Jesus, who live out our faith, we have to remember the source. Do you ever get a little too self-confident and find yourself doing something and just thinking, I will not mess this up, I will not make a mistake, and everything's going to be great? And I've had so many moments where my mind has gone to that place, and so many moments where I'm humbled very quickly after that. The disciples think, we're the ones doing this. Now, I think if you were to sit them down in Bible study time and ask them questions, they would tell you that power comes from God, but in the moment, where the crowd is there and Jesus is not, and they are the ones who can make this right, that's where their minds are at. We can handle this. We can fix it. And they learn in a very, very obvious way something that's a difficult lesson for a lot of us, which is we can't handle it. We can't fix it on our own. And when we begin to think that we have got this all under control, oftentimes are when the life moments come that prove to us we do not have this all under control. We need to remember the source of where this power comes from. And for them, this idea of this kind comes out by prayer as a reminder, you're going to God for this power. This is not you. This is something that God does. And even those times in previous chapters where you have gone out and you have healed and you've done amazing, miraculous things, it wasn't you doing that. It was God doing those things. And for each of us, it is the same. Now, I will tell you, I would love to walk out of here tonight and find Jesus transfiguring in the parking lot somewhere and see what that was like and be amazed by it and hear the booming voice from the sky and all of that stuff. I'm going to guess that's not going to happen. I'm going to guess we'll go out here tonight and it'll be like most Sunday nights when we go out and we'll talk about where we're going to eat dinner and all of those kinds of things, but there will be nothing incredibly miraculous by that. But I believe what we find in Mark chapter 9, the way that Jesus can help people in ways that no one else can, I believe that's who Jesus is. And I believe there are things in your life that you probably feel every bit as desperate about as this father does about his son. Whether it's about someone close to you or something going on in your own life, and you just really desperately need help. And this chapter shows us where to look for to that help. To know that God and his son are there for us to seek the help that they offer to us. Tonight, if you have never followed him before, you can be amazed, like these people in Mark chapter 9 were. You can be excited about what he can do in your life. You can be baptized into him, and it doesn't look like a guy with a demon convulsing on the ground and then suddenly being fine again, but I will tell you that change in your life is far beyond that, and that change in your eternity is far beyond that. Or if you have forgotten the source of where the good in your life and in our world comes from, remember that tonight like the disciples were forced to remember it in Mark chapter 9. Remember the fact that it's not us. We're not the ones who can do these things. It's God doing these things through us. And if there's some way we can help you to follow him or to come back to him tonight, one of our elders will be in the back, or you can come here to the front as together we stand and sing.